Morning everyone, welcome to another episode of Coffee HEMA where I try and make a point about HEMA in the time it takes to make a coffee. Although I'm not actually brewing a coffee right now, but I'm still going to do a video. I want to talk today about gloves for your unused hand, for whatever you want the word. Normally the left, could be the right, depending on your handedness, but essentially you're doing single-handed swords with some complex hilt or not. Generally speaking, people will wear a appropriately protective glove for their sword hand. There are exceptions, but I feel like talking to them is kind of pointless at this point. But often what times you'll see someone wearing a nice properly protective glove for their sword hand and a light glove or no glove at all for their backhand, which you see a lot in Olympic fencing with people wearing no glove on their backhand as well. But people do it in HEMA too. Short version of this video, please stop. And I'll explain that, of course, in a bit more detail. So the logic people have is basically, oh, it's my backhand. It's not involved in the fight. My sword hand is in front of me. That's likely to get hit. I'm swinging that around. But my backhand, it's going to be behind my head, or it's going to be, on my hip or something like that. No one's going to hit that. And for those that do genuinely keep the sword on their hip, I can kind of see the logic, but I also see it for people who are kind of having their hands sort of hovering around their head or kind of up here. And to be clear, like if you're doing small sword or something like that and you're using a light glove, it's a perfectly appropriate protective glove for that, so that's not an issue. But if you're doing saber, right, heavy kind of military saber stuff, and you're wearing a light glove on your hand and your hand is kind of here, you're a dumbass, right? Your hand is absolutely in play when you're doing that. Sorry, personally, I just call it dumbass, but I had this in a tournament I was in where the tournament allowed people to have a light glove on their backhand, and someone was holding their hand here, and I had to stop. I was competitive in the tournament, and this was my opponent doing this, and I basically put my hand up and stopped and said, I'm not comfortable fighting this person with the glove that they've got there and their hand there. I can't strike their head without breaking their fingers, and I'm not willing to break their fingers. So they did tell the person did put a heavier glove on, after I pointed this out, and it was fine. But there's this myth that, okay, my hand is out of play, it's in the back. Even when it's on your hip, humans are instinctual creatures, and someone who is quite commonly putting it on their hip, very, very often, you'll be cutting towards their head, and I'll be like, oh shit, something's coming on my head. Let me cover my head. Perfectly reasonable instinctual reaction when you're not wearing protective kit on your head and you are wearing protective kit on your hands, or even if there's nothing on both. But of course, when your head is more protected than your hand, this is dumb. You're asking for your finger being broken. So even in situation, and then of course there's grappling, right? You kind of close to grapple. Maybe it's not that common in your weapon, but you close to grapple. Your sword's coming out, fine. If everything goes to plan, your hand's fine. If you fuck it up slightly, how many of us have tried to grapple and accidentally just been hit in the hand with the sword because we get the timing wrong? Me, many times. And that's bad. And again, if you've got a light glove on your hand rather than a properly protective glove, or worse, no glove at all, you're going to do yourself an injury. So the myth that your backhand is not in play is just not the case. And then the second aspect of this is, well, why, right? If your backhand is not in play, you don't need the dexterity of a light glove. You gain no benefit from having a light glove on your hand. I can understand, particularly with like swords with complex hilts, heavier gloves don't fit. You see people doing broadsword is actually probably the most common for this, but you see people doing broadsword and they will wear a light glove on their front hand, on their sword hand, because that's all that will fit in this massive kind of basket. And it's mostly fine, apart from the wrist. The sword is pretty much protecting your hand, and it's okay to have a light glove on your sword hand because the protection is coming from the sword. But then they match gloves so that the backhand has also got a light glove where there's no protection from the sword. And it's like, well, it's not the same, right? It's not equivalent. And again, you don't need the dexterity. You don't need the fit into a sword because you're not wearing a sword holding a sword by definition. So absolutely no benefit from having a light glove on your backhand, except maybe if you don't own a heavy glove and that's all you've got. But seriously, buy a Red Dragon. They're cheap. It's better than using a leather glove. So this is a absolutely fault of sparring cultures and tournament rules. Right, in your club, you should not allow it. In tournaments, you absolutely should not allow it because people do random shit in tournaments all the time. And any tournament you're making rules, Wessex does this. You should explicitly say backhand needs to have appropriate protection as much as the front hand does. If anything, more so, as I say, because of these things. Because only bad things can happen. You gain no benefit for having it. You might break a finger or worse for not having it. Wear a proper glove. That's it.